I name you Emmanuel.
On the 8th day, a newborn child would bleed, not in tragedy, but in covenant. And in that moment, his name would be spoken.
I name you my beloved
For the first
child.
time.
I name you
No
Emmanuel.
balloons. No birth certificate. No quiet hospital room. 2,000 years ago. In the hill country of Judea. Or the dusty villages of Galilee. A child's name was not simply chosen. It was declared into history. And it happened. On the 8th day. Why 8? Why blood? Why wait? Today, we step back into that world. Into a limestone home lit by trembling oil lamps. Where a young mother cradles her infant. And a father watches the doorway. As neighbors gather. By the end of this journey,
Emmanuel.
you will understand why this ceremony mattered. Why it carried tension and honor. And why this single moment changes how we read the Gospels. Because this was never just about a name. It began with waiting. In the 1st century, childbirth was dangerous. There were no sterile instruments. No modern medicine. Women gave birth at home. Assisted by midwives and female relatives. The floor was packed earth. Water was drawn by hand. Linen cloths were simple and rough. The first days of life were uncertain. Infant mortality was painfully common. A family did not rush into celebration. They watched. They prayed. They waited. In an honor-shame culture, survival itself carried weight. A son preserved lineage. A daughter strengthened family bonds. But identity was not fully sealed. Until the 8th day. This was not cultural invention. It traced back. In Genesis 17. God commanded that every male among Abraham's descendants be circumcised on the 8th day. As a sign of the covenant. The body itself would carry the mark of belonging. To the God of Israel. 8 days later. The house fills quietly. Relatives gather. Perhaps an elder known for performing the rite is present. The infant is brought forward. The air is still. There is no anesthesia as we know it. The act is swift. The child cries. The mother feels it deeply. The father stands firm. Aware that this moment binds his son to generations past. To patriarchs. To prophets. To promises spoken centuries earlier. This is not cruelty. It is covenant. And then comes the declaration. The sign of the covenant is given. And the name is spoken. Names were not decorative. They carried meaning. They remembered ancestors. They declared gratitude. They expressed hope in God. The Father speaks. And everyone listens. We see the emotional weight of this in Luke's Gospel. When Elizabeth gave birth in her old age, her neighbors assumed the child would be named Zechariah, after his father. That would preserve family honor. That would follow expectation. But Elizabeth said, "He shall be called John." The room must have fallen silent. No one in their family bore that name. Tradition was being broken. Honor was at stake. Zechariah, still unable to speak, writes on a tablet. His name is John. And immediately, his tongue is loosed. This detail is often overlooked. The naming ceremony was public. Communal. A moment where identity, obedience, and reputation converged. When Zechariah confirmed the angel's instruction, he aligned his household with God's will. Over social expectation. Now, consider Jesus. At the end of 8 days. When he was circumcised. He was called Jesus. Imagine that home. Mary, still young. Joseph, steady but thoughtful. The infant, placed into waiting hands, the covenant sign, given. And then Joseph speaks the name he had been told in a dream. Yeshua. The Lord saves. It was a common name in that era. Many boys bore it. But this child would fulfill it. The one who would one day speak of a new covenant in his blood. First entered the covenant of Abraham. Through this ancient sign, He did not bypass the law. He entered, fully, into it. But wait. There is more. For firstborn sons, another act followed. Presentation, at the temple. Mary and Joseph brought Jesus to Jerusalem. And offered 2 pigeons. The sacrifice allowed, for those of modest means. This detail matters. It tells us they were not wealthy. It anchors the story, in real economic life. In the temple courts. Under towering stones. And echoing prayers. The child was presented, to God. And all of this began, on the 8th day. Today, we choose names for beauty, or uniqueness. We celebrate instantly. But in the time of Jesus, a name followed survival. It followed covenant. It followed obedience. There were no official records as we know them. There was memory. Community. Torah. A name bound a child, to story. So when we read the Gospels, and see names, Jesus, John, Mary, Simon, we are not reading casual labels. We are hearing echoes of rooms filled with waiting relatives, of fathers clearing their throats before speaking, of mothers holding their breath. This changes how we read Scripture. Because God entered history, not through spectacle, but through ordinary obedience, through a ceremony practiced for centuries, through a child who cried like every other child.
I name you Emmanuel.
On the 8th day, and in that humble home, when Joseph spoke the name Jesus, heaven's promise touched earth's tradition. The Lord saves. Not shouted from a palace balcony, but spoken quietly, in a covenant room. On the 8th day, if this journey into first-century life has deepened your understanding of the gospel story, let me know in the comments. What other moments from Jesus' world would you like to explore? Like this video, so others can rediscover the historical depth behind Scripture. And subscribe for more immersive biblical documentaries. Because when we step into their world, the Word becomes even more real. And that changes everything.